Hey, sir, if you don't mind introducing yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chairman. My name is Dan McKnight. I'm from Meridian, Legislative District 20, home to Chairman Palmer. And Chairman Palmer and members of the Transportation and Defense Committee, thank you for your time and opportunity to stand before you today to present what can be accurately called a resolution to defend the National Guard. I recognize that we have on the committee here several members who are veterans, including a colonel, a judge advocate, general attorney, Vietnam veterans, members of the Idaho National Guard, and I want to thank you for your service. I'm a proud veteran, having served 13 years in the United States Marines, the United States Army, and the Idaho Army National Guard. I was a member of the Idaho National Guard when I served in the war in Afghanistan in 2005 through 2007. Today I'm fortified by my brothers and sisters in arms with whom I served and have an unbreakable bond, and we have a mutual understanding that we still have a duty to serve in whatever capacity that we can. Our intention was to fill the room today with like-minded veterans, but after careful consideration and listening to the President's comments last night, we felt it was prudent for them to stay home and view these proceedings and listen to them online. There's no doubt that our fellow citizen soldiers in the National Guard here in Idaho will be called on soon to serve the community in any capacity, similar to what we see in other states in response to the coronavirus pandemic. The purpose of my visit to your committee today is to present a resolution for your consideration. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 15 of the United States Constitution. It's known as the Militia Clause. It states that the militia, which has been identified and codified in U.S. law and collectively referred to now as the National Guard, can be called into federal service to execute the laws of the Union, to suppress an insurrection, and to repel an invasion. Over the past half century, the role of the National Guard has changed dramatically. And after having a very limited role in the Vietnam War, the National Guard has been increasingly used as the easy button when dealing with undeclared and endless wars around the world. In 2003, the United States invaded Iraq, thrusting our nation and the men and women in uniform into endless wars on multiple fronts. We'd already been deployed in a war in Afghanistan for 2 years, and we were ready to launch another massive war and maintain both for an indefinite and undefined period of time. Secretary of State Donald Rumsfeld famously is quoted as saying, "Washington, D.C. went to war with the army that we had, not necessarily the army we wanted to have." He used the National Guard to fill the gaps where the Army and the active duty military fell short, supplying up to 45% of the troops that were deployed in 2005. By 2011, more than 300,000 National Guard troops had deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan. And overall, the National Guard, the militia of the states, have suffered nearly 20% of the total military casualties in the global war on terror. It's important to repeat, the National Guard has a threefold mission. It can be called into federal service to repel an invasion, to put down an insurrection, and to enforce the laws of the Union. Augmenting and supplementing the active duty military is and should be part of the function of the National Guard, but it must be done in a manner prescribed by the foundation of our entire nation. It must be done with the power and authority of the United States Constitution. War powers and the ability to wage war was a great concern to the founders and framers of our Constitution, and committing the lives of United States citizens and members of the armed forces to engage in war is such a solemn power that our founding fathers, who were reluctant to concentrate that power into the hands of too few, denied the office of the President the authority to go to war unilaterally. If America was going to survive as a republic, they reasoned that declaration of war required a careful debate in an open forum among the public's representatives, the Congress. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11 of the United States Constitution says that Congress shall have the power to declare war. President Abraham Lincoln famously offered that the provisions of the Constitution giving the war-making powers to Congress was dictated by the following reasons: that kings always had the deepest desire to involve and impoverish their people in wars, pretending generally, if not always, that the good of the people was the object. This was understood to be the most oppressive of all kingly oppressions, and our founders resolved to frame the Constitution so that no single person should hold the power to bring this oppression upon us. Fast forward to where we're at now. Congress has now abdicated their constitutional duty and responsibilities in their war-making power. It's been 70 years since Congress last fulfilled their duty and declared war against Hungary, Bulgaria, and Romania in World War II. Since that time, Republicans and Democrats in Congress collectively and willfully have given away their authority to the executive branch. their most solemn duty to declare war and protect the United States of America has been freely given away. With this abdication of their power, Congress has destroyed the delicate checks and balances that were so brilliantly crafted in our Constitution. And the United States is now engaged in perpetual and endless wars. We've been at war in Afghanistan for 19 years, and we now have members of our community who graduated from our schools, who are from my neighborhood, who are likely friends with your children, who know only a state of war. They only know that America's been at war their entire lives. And now they are fighting in a war that started before they were born. We're engaged in a war that's the longest in our nation's history. We were attacked by Islamic extremists on 9/11, and our response was proper and it was just. But we have not had a proper oversight because we never went to Congress for a declaration of war, as required by the Constitution. The military has fought with honor and distinction and extreme professionalism, but there is no longer a military solution in Afghanistan. 75% of the members of Congress who signed the authorization of use of military force in 2001 are no longer in Congress. Think about that for a moment. Fewer than 25% of our representatives in Congress, the very people entrusted with the power to declare war, who willfully gave that power away and allowed us to go to war without a constitutional declaration, have retired or left office and no longer have to answer for that abdication of power. We now have a Congress that is comprised of 75% of its members who continually ignore the state of perpetual war because it wasn't their war to begin with. They didn't authorize the war because they weren't even in office yet. They didn't abdicate their responsibilities. They didn't fail to provide oversight. They didn't fail to call senior government officials, generals, and diplomats before their congressional committees and demand answers to the 20-year unanswered question, why are we there and what is our mission? They don't have to act to end the war because this is not their war. Members of the Transportation and Defense Committee, this is my war. This war belongs to our generation. The responsibility to act boldly and with sound constitutional principle is ours. We cannot pass this war on to our children and our grandchildren. We cannot shirk our moral responsibility to hold our elected representatives responsible for allowing our federal citizens to deploy to a forgotten war over and over and over and over. Our active duty military cannot maintain the pace of missions in Afghanistan, Iraq, Yemen, Syria, and any of the other 49 nations in the continent of Africa where we're actively engaged in combat operations. When we wisely stopped the draft in 1973, we became an all-volunteer military. And during World War II, 11% of our adult population in the United States served in the military. Today, that number is fewer than 0.5%, which means that 99.5% of our population does not serve in the military and does not have the literal skin in the game when it comes to issues of perpetual and endless war. Our military is lean, our military is effective, and our military deserves the honor and praise that we bestow upon them. But our active duty military cannot maintain the pace of the mission on multiple war fronts without consistently, repeatedly, and systematically reaching down into the states and taking federal control of the state militia, the National Guard. Our citizen soldiers, members of the Idaho National Guard, folks who have raised their hand and sworn an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, our neighbors, business owners, policemen, teachers, tradesmen, mechanics, are called upon over and over and over again to leave their jobs, their families, their homes, their businesses, and supplement the active duty military in a perpetual war which is approaching 2 decades in length. And this is the crux of the problem. War has not been declared by Congress, and we fundamentally do not know what we are doing there as indicated by the Special Investigating General for Afghan Reconstruction in a bombshell report that was released a few months ago called the Afghanistan Papers. The National Guard cannot and should not be the easy button for an out-of-control U.S. foreign policy. The National Guard cannot and should not be used to prop up the opium trade in Afghanistan or the morally bankrupt pedophile culture known as bachi-bazi. National Guard cannot and should not be deployed, as the South Carolina National Guard was, to occupy Syria and defend their oil rigs. That is simply not the mission of the National Guard. Dustin Ard, he grew up in Idaho, and he's from the district where I live. He grew up in our district, Chairman, District 20. He attended schools in our neighborhood, graduating from Meridian Medical Arts Charter School, and he was active in the same church that we attend. He enlisted in the Army after serving a mission, and he became a decorated member of the elite Green Beret. Sergeant First Class Ard was killed in Afghanistan on August 29th of last year, just a few months ago. 18 years after the war began, Dustin leaves behind a young daughter and his pregnant wife. Other members of our community here in Idaho also serve in a Green Beret unit, the 19th Special Forces Group, which is one of 2 National Guard groups in the United States Military Special Forces. These elite National Guard soldiers have been deployed to the global war on terror 7, 8, 9, 10 times or more. Each time they deploy, they leave behind their families, their full-time civilian jobs, they leave their homes and professionally and proficiently carry out their orders. And upon return to their homes, they're transferred back to the states, back to the National Guard, where they're left to their own devices to seek treatment for PTSD and TBI, substance abuse, anxiety, and a host of other problems that manifest themselves in even the strongest and most brave of those who serve. Our National Guard should not carry this disproportionate burden of repeated combat deployments because they are the invisible warriors that quietly serve. Members of the Transportation and Defense Committee, this resolution is a statement that Idahoans love and honor our military and have proudly served when called upon. This resolution before you can be summarized in a few words in a proper understanding of the Constitution and the enumerated powers within. We respect the right of the President of the United States to order our National Guard into the service of the United States for any purpose which he is authorized to use the militia of the states by the Constitution. We resolve that if the Idaho National Guard is to be called to active federal service of the United States, such as in participation in an armed conflict or performance of an instrumentality of war, then the United States Congress must first do their job and declare war as required by the Constitution. Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11. Before we ask the National Guard to do their jobs, we should demand that Congress does theirs first. Congress must put their name on the line before we ask our Idaho National Guardsmen to put their boots on the ground. This resolution is in support of the document that each of us in this room, whether as legislators or as veterans, have sworn an oath to uphold and protect. This resolution is no way an admonition of the distinction and professionalism of the United States military or the National Guard. This resolution is an admonishment of the failures of the United States Congress, including members of our own delegation from the state of Idaho, who have allowed, whether through active abdication of their duty or through passive abandonment of it, for these wars to perpetuate from one generation to the next. Socrates, at the height of the Greek Empire, was brought before a jury and put on trial for not recognizing the gods that were recognized by the state. In his own defense, Socrates likened himself to the gadfly, stinging the giant lazy horse, which was the Athenian state. Without him, Socrates claimed, the state was drifting into a deep sleep, but through his influence, as irritating as it may have been to some, can cause the state to be stung repeatedly and waken into a productive and virtuous action. Well, I don't recognize the gods that our nation state has repeatedly worshipped, the gods of perpetual war, the gods of war profiteering, or the gods known as the military-industrial complex. I'm here, and you should be as well, to be the gadfly that stings the giant steed of the United States Congress, to awaken them from their deep sleep and be productive and virtuous in manners of war. Honorable representatives of the state of Idaho, Chairman Palmer, I present to you the resolution to defend the National Guard, and I ask that you take a stand and send a clear message from the freedom-loving people of the state of Idaho that we respectfully demand that Congress reclaim their authority in matters of war. And if there is a significant threat to our national security that is so urgent and so vital that it requires the use of our military, then Congress must provide the constitutional authority to declare war so that the President himself may call on the militias of the state, the very National Guard that I'm speaking about, to answer the call and serve our republic. I thank you for your time and the opportunity to speak to you today, and I'm available for any questions that you may have.
If you have any questions, Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm for a motion.
Motion's in order.
We make a motion that we send this memorial to the second reading calendar with the due passage.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion, or is there any other questions? Representative Davis.
Just for a statement, Mr. Chairman.
Representative Davis.
I just would like to thank you very much for coming and bringing this forward and for your statements today.
Thank you, Representative.
Thank you. Is there any other discussion? Seeing none, the motion is to introduce and send to the second reading calendar, RS 27971. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Hearing none, motion carries. Thanks, Dan.
Thank you, Chairman.